My name is Diamond Point, and I am a member of the Musqueam First Nation and grew up on the Musqueam Indian Reserve, which is located south of Marine Drive near the mouth of the Fraser River. The Musqueam are a traditional Hunkaminam-speaking people who have always moved throughout our territory for fishing, hunting, trapping, and gathering. As a community, we have remained distinct in our cultural practices despite the impacts of residential schools, colonial laws banning our ceremonies, and other attempts to assimilate our people. Growing up, I have learned that our teachings and practices are part of who we are. Through the wisdom and resilience of our ancestors, our connections to our lands and waters have been preserved. As Musqueam people, we share our teachings by listening, asking questions, being open to learning from others, and acknowledging what we don't know. Since growing up on reserve my whole life, I feel like I have had the privilege of witnessing firsthand these teachings and day-to-day interactions within my community and being taught these values from not only elders and family members, but also my community members. I am incredibly fortunate to have grown up with strong role models throughout my life. When I think of inspirational people in my life, I think of three very important men that mean a lot to me, and I aspire to live my life and conduct myself like these three. Although I have never met him, I have immense amount of respect for my great-great-grandfather, James Point. He was known as a Musqueam historian and a great storyteller. I grew up with my father always telling me Grandpa James' stories and how incredible his memory was. My father has told me that Grandpa James would tell him stories of how he remembers encountering a European person for the very first time, and his signature can be found on our Musqueam Declaration. My grandfather, Robert Point, was a man who carried his cultural knowledge and values with him wherever he went. He was always willing to teach and share with anyone. He was passionate about his people, community, and family, and made sure to instill his teachings within each and every one of his children and grandchildren. My father, Jordan Point, is a man who has always embedded within me many different types of values and teachings. In my opinion, my father has always done a great job passing down teachings he learned from those before him and providing me with intergenerational knowledge. My father has always supported me in furthering my education, and that living in good relations with one another means that we must be willing to take responsibility for the impacts of our behavior towards others, as well as the responsibility for our responses to the behaviors of others. Our elders have explained how people made in the very beginning were not altogether right. It was like they had no teachings. Only some were right. During these times, it is said the Delta was only water and Point Roberts was just an island. The one they called the Transformer arrived. He took pity on the people and began traveling alongside them to help. The people and creatures that were not right were taught. He taught us empathy, charity, forgiveness, compassion, and the importance of sharing the land, as well as other responsibilities. He left his teachings where he walked, and these teachings grew into our law. Those who refused to learn, he fixed, transforming them. Many were turned to stone, and other into animals. These travels and transformations are written in the earth, captured in our ancient histories, and recorded in our place names, making these lands core to our teachings. To this day, this ancestral knowledge and our connections to these places are reaffirmed through our cultural teachings, practices, responsibilities. These laws are the foundations of our present and future success. This story resonates with me because it represents the commitment that must be made to work together in order to achieve success. Stories like this are important to incorporate into my Indigenous knowledge system because it gives me the foundation and framework to engage with those around me in deep and lifelong learning. Although I was pretty immersed and surrounded by my own cultural practices and teachings as a child, I never had much exposure of other Indigenous culture groups. When I was 15, I participated in the Native Youth Program run by the Museum of Anthropology. The Native Youth Program is a summer program run through the museum every summer and hires Indigenous youth ages 15 to 18 years old. The Native Youth Program is the longest running public program within the Museum of Anthropology and has been running for almost 40 years. It wasn't until I participated in this program where I really started to learn the different elements of Indigenous knowledge and various ways of knowing. The Native Youth Program gave me the opportunity to further explore the complexities of Indigenous knowledge and gave me the framework to begin to shape my own Indigenous identity. Through this program, I felt like I learned more about my own personal awareness and responsibility, as well as developing a positive personal and cultural identity. I learned throughout my teens that while each First Nation has its own unique identity, values, and practices, there are shared worldviews and common understandings of how we interact and learn about our world. By developing a positive cultural identity, I began to realize that I connected with my culture through art and design. As an emerging artist, studying traditional Coast Salish design elements allows me to meaningfully connect with my heritage and ancestors. I connect with Indigenous knowledge through art because I think it's important to be aware of how ceremonial knowledge and teachings were demonstrated through artistic expression, which in return formed political and governance structures that carried out cultural protocols. A CM in Coast Salish culture translates to a person of high status. Growing up, my dad always told me that it is important to conduct and carry yourself like a CM. Reminding myself of this always grounds me and brings me back to my goals. Applying teachings from my cultural heritage within my profession as an educator will allow me to create meaningful and relevant connections to students and colleagues. In high school, I was barely taught at all about Indigenous peoples or Indigenous knowledge systems, and I hope to change that. I've been inspired to become an Indigenous educator because I've always connected with cultural and holistic learning frameworks. I think it's beneficial for all students to be balanced in all realms, intellectually, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. For me, applying Indigenous knowledge within the educational system is the key to creating understanding. In order to create understanding, we must be open to learning and becoming better versions of ourselves from the influence of others. I have the role of leading and being a mentor for others in that I am applying the teachings of mutual respect, mutual recognition, and mutual responsibility. My Indigenous knowledge journey is incorporating these traditional ways of understanding relationships in order to develop a framework of living in good relations. Finally, these teachings of Indigenous knowledge are important to carry within each of us as we all continue this ongoing journey of moving forward and empowering one another.